Maya tightened her coat against the drizzle as her tired old car rattled down the city street. She was just coming home from a long evening shift, her mind already on the bills waiting on the counter, when she saw him. A man in a designer suit sat slumped on the curb, tie loose, eyes glassy with something more than alcohol. For a moment she hesitated. Single moms didn't exactly make a habit of picking up strangers, but something about the loneliness in his posture tugged at her heart. "Need a ride?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. The man blinked up at her, as if surprised anyone had stopped. "You'd really do that?" he slurred, half a laugh escaping. "Better me than the sidewalk," she replied. In the car he introduced himself between tired chuckles and broken sighs. Daniel Hart, CEO of Hart & Company. A man whose name belonged on the front page of business magazines, not in the backseat of her dented sedan. He talked more than she expected. About pressure, about betrayal, about how empty success felt when there was no one waiting at home. Maya didn't judge, she just listened. Listening was something she'd learned to do well, in nights of silence when her little boy was asleep and the loneliness pressed in like a second skin. By the time she dropped him off at a gated mansion, she thought she'd never see him again. But a few days later came the knock on her door. Standing there was not Daniel, but a little girl with a messy ponytail and a teddy bear tucked under one arm. "Daddy says you're the lady who saved him," she announced brightly. "Can you be my friend?" Behind her stood Daniel, looking less like a CEO and more like a man holding on to a second chance. He explained awkwardly that he'd tracked her down to thank her, that he owed her more than a ride. Maya wanted to protest. She wasn't used to being wanted, but his daughter's warm hand slipped into hers, and resistance melted. What began as a thank you dinner turned into something deeper. Shared laughter over burnt pancakes, afternoons at the park, evenings when her son and his daughter plotted games together while she and Daniel traded stories across the table. Slowly, gently, the walls around her heart began to crumble. One evening, while Maya read a bedtime story, Daniel's daughter leaned against her and whispered with the simplicity only children carry, "Daddy ordered a girlfriend, but I don't want just a part-time one. Can you start forever with us?" Maya's breath caught. She looked across the room to where Daniel stood, his confident boardroom mask stripped away. He took her hand, voice low and earnest. "I thought I was looking for someone to play a role," he confessed. "But what I really found was you. You're the missing piece I didn't know I was searching for. Will you give us forever?" Tears blurred her vision as she smiled. For the first time in years, her heart whispered yes. And with that, a rainy night ride home became the beginning of a love that promised forever. Maya had just settled in for a quiet evening when the knock came. Her son was coloring on the floor, and she expected maybe a neighbor or the landlord. But when she opened the door, she froze. There, on the doorstep of her modest apartment, stood a little girl with a teddy bear clutched to her chest, bright eyes fixed on Maya as though she'd been waiting for her all her life. "Daddy says you're the lady who saved him," the child said with a grin. "Can you be my friend?" Maya blinked, startled, before her gaze shifted to the tall figure standing just behind the girl. Daniel Hart, the man she had driven home only days ago. Tonight, though, he wasn't the broken man slumped against the rain. He looked sharper, clearer, but still nervous in a way that made him seem almost boyish. "I'm sorry to show up like this," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She insisted on meeting you properly. And, well, I thought I owed you a proper thank you." Maya's first instinct was to refuse. Her world didn't have room for CEOs and their children. Her life was schedules, bills, and making sure her son never felt the emptiness she carried at night. Yet the girl's hand slipped into hers with such simple trust that her defenses faltered. She invited them in. That evening began something unexpected. Daniel cooked dinner, a clumsy attempt at pasta that ended with flour on the counter and laughter in the air. His daughter and Maya's son bonded instantly, chasing each other through the apartment as if they had always been siblings. And Daniel, for all his wealth and power, seemed at home in her small kitchen, asking about her life, her work, her dreams. Over the weeks that followed, the visits continued. Sometimes it was a playdate at the park, other times a quiet meal after work. Maya found herself laughing more than she had in years. She was surprised at how easily Daniel fit into her world, how his daughter's laughter filled spaces in her heart she didn't know were still empty. Daniel, too, began to change, his hard edges softening, his eyes lighter. He no longer looked like the lonely man she'd met that rainy night but like someone rediscovering what mattered most. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep on the couch, Daniel stayed behind. The apartment was dim, quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching Maya with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I had everything. Money, a company, influence. But none of it meant anything until you gave me something real again." Maya wanted to argue, to remind him she was just a single mom struggling to make ends meet. But the truth was written in his eyes and in the way his daughter clung to her hand each time they met. It wasn't about what she lacked, it was about what they had found together. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Maya sat on the couch with Daniel's daughter nestled against her side, a picture book open in her lap. Her own son had already dozed off, his small frame curled under a blanket on the other end of the sofa. The glow of the lamp cast a golden warmth over the room, softening the edges of her modest apartment and making it feel, just for a moment, like home was bigger than four walls. Maya's voice carried softly as she read the story aloud, but halfway through, the little girl turned her head and studied her face with wide, thoughtful eyes. She pressed her teddy closer to her chest, then whispered words that slipped into the air like a prayer. "Daddy ordered a girlfriend," she said matter-of-factly, as only a child could. "But I don't want just a part-time one. Can you start forever with us?" The book slipped slightly in Maya's hands as her breath caught. She stared down at the girl, speechless, her heart stumbling between laughter and tears. Children had a way of asking questions with no warning, but this one pierced straight through the fragile walls she'd built to protect herself. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. From the doorway, Daniel stood frozen, his expression a mixture of surprise and something far deeper. He stepped forward slowly, crouching beside the couch, his gaze shifting between his daughter and Maya. He reached for Maya's hand, his touch steady, grounding her in the moment. "She's right," he said softly, his voice stripped of all the polished charm he wore in boardrooms. "At first, I thought I needed someone to fill a role in our lives, someone to be a companion for me and a presence for her. But then you came along, and I realized I wasn't looking for a part. I was searching for you. For this. For us." Maya's eyes burned with unshed tears. She had spent years convincing herself she was meant only to survive, to raise her child the best she could, to find scraps of joy in small victories. She had long ago stopped imagining someone could look at her the way Daniel was looking now, with a kind of reverence, as if she was the missing piece in a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his whole life. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "I'm not perfect. I'm just, you're everything," he interrupted, his grip tightening around her fingers. "Everything I didn't know I needed. Please, say yes. Say you'll give us forever." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft, steady breaths of their sleeping children. Then, slowly, Maya smiled through the tears spilling down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to stop the laugh that bubbled up through her emotion. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll start forever with you." Daniel exhaled like a man who had finally found home. His daughter squealed, wrapping her arms around Maya's waist, while Maya's son stirred and sleepily mumbled before curling back into the blanket. For the first time in years, Maya's heart was full, not with loneliness but with love. That rainy night ride had been the beginning of something neither of them expected, and tonight, it became the promise of forever.